Okay, welcome everyone to another lecture for History 1302. We're going to try to finish our chapter about the West today. Will that happen? I don't know, but we're going to try. Okay, might as well. So, we have been learning about the West and the wars for the West. And last week, we talked about kind of the typical cycle, okay? The United States gives away free land in the Great Plains, which is also occupied and claimed by Native Americans. Homesteaders from the United States move onto the Great Plains. Then they get into conflicts with the Indians. Then those conflicts turn into full-blown wars. Typically, the United States wins those wars, and then the Native Americans are forced to live on reservations, okay? Ultimately, what the United States Army turns to is destroying the buffalo, and one by one, the different Native American tribes are put on reservations, and then sometimes the cycle repeats, where then more settlers move onto reservation land, and then the cycle repeats again, and the reservations get smaller and smaller, okay? But all the major Native American tribes are basically put under the heel of the U.S. military during this time period. Probably the most famous of these stories comes from the battles with the nation of the Sioux, okay? The Sioux Nation, they were a very large group, and it wasn't just like one tribe, it's like a collection of tribes, okay? So it'd probably be more appropriate to call them things like, the Cheyenne, the Crow, etc. But anyways, but we'll get to where this comes from. So, let me get the year right. Okay, so in 1862, okay, 1864 in Colorado, 1864, okay, there is a conflict on and off, guerrilla war for about 30 years between the United States military and the Sioux, okay. In November, 700 Colorado volunteers under Colonel John Chivington attack a friendly band of Cheyenne Indians who were camped outside of a fort trying to negotiate for peace, okay? So there was this group of Native Americans, like a village, that were negotiating for peace in a sort of a conflict with the United States, and a group of volunteers under Colonel John Chivington just massacre an entire tribe, an entire village, okay? This sparks off a war where an Indian chief, Black Kettle, he tried to signal friendship, but they ended up being killed. About 150 of these Native Americans are killed, including mothers with babies in their arms, okay? Chivington gets in trouble for this, but it doesn't really matter. It starts a full war. And in 1865, virtually all the Plains Indians joined in the first Sioux War to drive white people out from their lands, okay? So we have a fight that goes back and forth for several years until a ceasefire in 1868 is signed. In 1868, the Treaty of Fort Laramie ends the 4 bloody years of fighting between whites and Indians over the territory of the Sioux. And it's guerrilla warfare, okay? The Sioux Nation, they attack American settlers, they attack American soldiers. The American soldiers, they attack Sioux villagers and Sioux warriors, okay? This war is not being played by the rules where it's just soldiers fighting, okay? Women and children are being killed on both sides. It gets pretty bad. But in 1868, a treaty is finally settled, and the Sioux are given a large Indian reservation, one in Oklahoma and the other one in the Dakota Badlands, okay? The Badlands, okay, are also known as the Black Hills of South Dakota, okay? So the Sioux, they're kicked out of Colorado. They're kicked out of the place that they thought was theirs, and they're forced to live in either Oklahoma or in South Dakota, okay? So many Sioux live in South Dakota in a region called the Black Hills, which is kind of this corner right around between Wyoming, Nebraska, South Dakota, this area, okay? Now, They fought for 4 years. This is what they get. And for Americans in the United States, we're okay with this treaty because no one really cares about the Black Hills. They're not like the most fertile place to farm. So farmers aren't really that concerned. Okay. And so for about 6 years, there is peace between the Sioux and the U.S. military. But 6 years later, a young cavalry colonel named George Armstrong Custer breaks the treaty, leading an expedition into the sacred Black Hills of the Sioux, or they considered them to be sacred. The Black Hills were considered to be sacred to the Sioux, like a holy land to them. And Custer, he goes on an expedition looking for gold. Okay? Now, let's talk a little bit about this guy named George Armstrong Custer. Okay, George Armstrong Custer is a handsome young dude. Okay, he is a cavalry commander. He's dashing. Okay, he's cocky. He's got that tough guy attitude. The women, they love him. He's got these long flowing blonde locks of hair. He's got this big sporty mustache. You know, he's a cavalry dude. Okay, back then they didn't have cool cars. Okay, but like, you know, he's gonna be riding a Mustang or whatever. He's got the fancy car, fancy hair. Okay, he dresses fancy. Custer, probably the only person that liked Custer more than the ladies is Custer himself, okay? He's a big fan of George Armstrong Custer, just so you know. And Custer, he was a Civil War commander. He was a cavalry commander in the Civil War, but he didn't really see enough action in the Civil War. He didn't really get famous enough in the Civil War. And Custer's got big dreams to be big and famous and maybe enter into politics one day. If you look at the history of American politics, just about every time we have a major war, we get a president, okay? For example, most of the founding fathers were involved in the Revolution, but you probably remember that George Washington was the main commander, and he became president, okay? Andrew Jackson, he was one of the most famous commanders from the War of 1812. He became president. William Henry Harrison, he was also in the War of 1812, and against the Indian Wars of his time, he became president. Zachary Taylor, he was the commander of U.S. forces in a huge chunk of the Mexican-American War. He became president. Ulysses S. Grant, he was a commander in the Civil War, and he became president. So, George Armstrong Custer, he's thinking, if I can become the guy that defeats the Indians, if I can become the guy that's the hero of the Indian Wars, maybe I've got a future in politics, okay? So he's saying he's got these big dreams, okay? So Custer breaks the treaty and they discover gold in the Black Hills. When they discover gold, this leads to a gold rush, okay? A large amount of the settlement of the West is from gold rushes. Like we've talked a little bit about the California gold rush of 1848 and 1849. When people discover gold somewhere, people just gotta go. They just got, because there's this chance to become super wealthy overnight. And so all these Americans start flooding into the Black Hills. And obviously this leads to conflict because the treaty says that those Black Hills belong to the Sioux and that there shouldn't be American settlers there. So obviously the Sioux start to defend their territory. And so Americans are getting killed and attacked and threatened. And so this leads to the U.S. military mobilizing to fight the Sioux. Okay, the Sioux are led by leaders like Sitting Bull and Red Cloud, okay? And the Sioux, they start gathering together thousands of warriors, okay? Some of the biggest, there's at a certain point, we see about 7,000 Sioux and Cheyenne allied together. So what we see happen in the summer of 1876 is Custer has stirred up a hornet's nest, okay? He has a 1 cavalry regiment, the 7th Cavalry. It's about 600 soldiers, okay? The 7th Cavalry Regiment, they're like light cavalry, okay? They're reconnaissance people. They're not like ready to fight a huge war all on their own. Custer is given the orders to wait, to contain the Sioux, to keep them in the reservation. Don't let them like go off on the warpath and start, running all throughout American settlement. Just keep them in the Black Hills and wait for reinforcements to deal with the problem. But Custer, he ain't gonna wait. All right? Do you think he's gonna be famous for being the guy that sat around and waited for help? No. You want to be the famous hero of the Sioux Wars, you got to go in there, you got to start killing some Sioux. That's George Armstrong Custer's idea. So he leads his regiment right into a massive trap at the Little Bighorn River. Okay? So there is a map of the Battle of Little Bighorn in your textbook, okay, that you can look at. But I'm going to draw a really terrible map of it that is not accurate at all, but it will explain what's going on. So there's this river, right? The Little Bighorn. There's a bend in the river, okay? In this bend in the river, there's an Indian village, okay, a Sioux village, okay? Custer and his 7th Cavalry with his 600 soldiers, they see this village and they go in thinking that they're going to catch the Sioux off guard. But it is a trap. Okay? When Custer attacks the village, he is surrounded by 7,000 Sioux. Okay? Or rather, I think it was at that particular battle, it may not have been full 7,000. There's 7,000 in the alliance. Yeah. There's 7,000 Sioux. And Custer actually, he broke a lot of rules in warfare. Okay? First one, if you're outnumbered, don't divide your forces. Okay? Robert E. Lee managed to do it for a few battles because he was a pretty good general and he was sneaky. But most of the time, if you're outnumbered, you keep all your people together as one. But anyways, he divided his forces to spread out looking for the Sioux. So he had around 276 guys, okay? Number 2, don't put your back to a river. That is a bad position to be in, okay? Because when the Sioux arrive, there is nowhere to run. They are surrounded on all sides by a river, okay? And so if they try to cross the river, they're going to get shot at while they're crossing the river. That's not a good option. And they're surrounded on all sides by the Sioux, so there's no way to escape. At the Battle of Little Bighorn, George Armstrong Custer and every single one of the men in his regiment that was with him, 276 men, are slaughtered. Completely annihilated. Not a single survivor. The Indians, after the battle, mutilate the bodies. Okay? They cut them up into little pieces and scramble all around them.
The Indians killed him?
Yeah.
How?
Arrows, probably. They surrounded him. He attacked the village. He was not that smart of a dude.
Oh, okay, the blue's the river.
Yeah, the purple, this is the river.
Oh.
These are the Sioux. These are the Sioux. Like 7,000.
Oh, okay, I'm super backwards.
Okay, so like thousands of Sioux against a few hundred soldiers. Maybe not, it might have been 3,000. I don't know, the book doesn't have the right numbers. Anyway, the numbers are not important, okay? It was thousands to a few hundred, okay? Custer is surrounded, they fight, and they get slaughtered, okay? They scramble up the dead bodies. To this day, no one knows exactly where George Armstrong Custer is in that field, okay? Like archaeologists have gone back and they find like bones here, bones there. It's like they just chopped them up and mutilated them, okay? You know, to send a message to the United States. Leave us alone. Don't attack us. Bad things will happen. Now, the way that the Battle of Little Bighorn is portrayed in popular culture is a good opportunity to talk about memory and history. Okay? Today is 2021. We look back on 1876 and the Battle of Little Bighorn. We look back on it with the eyes of today, okay? We have all the archaeological evidence. Today, we try to incorporate the Indian perspective into history. We talk about what it was like for the Sioux, and we are much more willing to kind of look at both sides. And in some cases, you know, there's some history professors who give you like pretty much only the Native American side, you know, and it's one of those things where there is a temptation among historians because what happened to the Indians was wrong, and it was tragic. But there is this temptation to say that because bad things happened to them, there was nothing bad that they ever did, okay? Right? Just because you have suffered does not mean that you are perfect. Just so you know, okay? And some people are going to tell you, oh, they never did anything wrong. Well, there's certainly more wrong things happened to them, but we need to be fair. We need to be objective today. But that's not really how people saw it back then. For Americans who heard about the Battle of Little Bighorn, Custer became a martyr. A martyr is someone who dies for a cause, like a religious martyr. Okay, you think about the story of Paul, the apostle, who we believe got executed because of his faith. It's like a martyr. Okay, Custer probably wasn't a martyr, and he's probably did something dumb and got killed. But anyways, people in America, they hear about this in the rest of the country, and they get the story told by dime novel writers and yellow journalists. And we'll talk about this more, hopefully, as we move on. But yellow journalism was a very common practice during this time. Oh, and it still exists today, okay? All right, but anyways, journalists, their goal is to make money. Make no mistake. Journalists will tell you, oh, we're defending democracy. They want to make money. That's what they want. They want you to click on the article. They want you to read what they have to say. That's why they do clickbait. That's why they do all these things to get people to read their stuff, okay? It was the same thing back then, okay? How do you get someone to buy your newspaper? By having outrageous, crazy titles and stories and headlines, okay? And this story sold newspapers. Massacre of the Seventh Cavalry. Brave General George Armstrong Custer fought to the last man, surrounded by hordes of savages. Okay, he took an arrow to the knee and he kept on fighting. He took another arrow. He took another arrow. With his last breath, he said, "This is for America." And they cut off his head. Right? And you're reading this story and you're in New York City and you're like, oh my goodness, those awful, horrible Indian savages. We got to do something about this. Because that's all you know, okay? What kind of news you consume determines what kind of opinions that you have, okay? Just so you know, if you listen to one side of the story, that's the side of the story that you're going to believe, okay? People in the United States, they didn't get the Indian side of the story, okay? They didn't get the part where he was like attacking a Sioux village, probably full of women and children. They didn't get that part, okay? They get this glorified vision of George Armstrong Custer, whereas modern historians today kind of think that, number one, he's kind of dumb, kind of cocky, and he's also like trying to kill a bunch of like Indians that we had made a treaty with them and an agreement with them that we were going to stay off their land. So anyways, he's in the wrong and he got killed and, he was doing stuff to get himself killed and he got all his men killed as well with him. Okay. So he is remembered at the time as a legend, as a martyr. And remember George Armstrong Custer. Remember the Seventh Cavalry. Avenge these Seventh Cavalry. This is a rallying moment for the United States, and they reinvigorate their fight against the Cheyenne and the Sioux, and they defeat them. The Battle of Little Bighorn is about the only major battle that the Indians actually win. Pretty much all the other ones, they lose, okay? And so, what happens next is that Crazy Horse, Sitting Bull, Red Cloud might have been earlier. Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse are the leaders at this point, okay?
So all these, like there's Custer State Park, there's Crazy Horse, like all that became like monumental stuff?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's like a giant statue, like around the Black Hills of South Dakota is right around the place where like Mount Rushmore is, okay? Those like that mountain range, okay? They're called like the Badlands because like they are tough, rugged terrain, mountains, real wild territory. It's hard to farm there. Now, because there was gold there was a demand for settlement. But those mountains, they carved like Mount Rushmore into one of those mountains in the Black Hills. And near Mount Rushmore, there's another one that they're carving of Crazy Horse, which, was that Indian leader. And his statue is going to, if they ever finish it, like they've been working on. Yeah, if they ever finish it, it's going to be like bigger than Mount Rushmore, I think. But yeah, it's all up there in that part of like South Dakota, Wyoming area. You can visit a lot of these places today. They're like national parks and stuff there. You can go visit the Battle of Little Bighorn. You can visit those places and see where it all happened. And but this is called Custer's Last Stand, okay, or the Battle of Little Bighorn. But today, historians look back and we see like more of the context. And what happens after this is that the U.S. military like counterattacks, okay, railroads brought in more soldiers, prospectors moved in, settlers moved in, and by late summer 1876, the Sioux were forced to split into small bands to obey the army. So there's this big war band of like thousands of Sioux, and they're really big and tough. But as the army puts pressure on them, they have to break up into tiny little bands, and it goes back to guerrilla warfare again. Okay, and pretty soon they're pretty much all put on reservations. One by one, those little bitty bands are either defeated, forced to go on reservations. One group of Native Americans called the Nez Perce, they try to escape. The Nez Perce in Idaho, they lead this huge like runaway where they try to run away to Canada to get away from the U.S. military, but they are hounded down and they are captured and they are forced onto reservations. And one by one, all the major Native American tribes are put on reservations. Some of the last holdouts are like the Comanche and the Apache. Okay, Geronimo, a leader of Apache Indians, he like at the very end, he's so desperate, he just starts like this, Geronimo, what you say when you jump into a swimming pool. Geronimo was an Apache war chief, and he like started just like attacking like villages and towns of white settlers as like revenge, and you know, he became really famous, infamous enemy number one before he's hunted down and defeated. The last of the Comanche war chiefs was Quanah Parker, who, if you remember we talked about last week, Quanah Parker was the son of Cynthia Ann Parker, who was that white woman from Texas who was captured by the Comanche Indians as a little kid, and she was raised as a Comanche. Quanah Parker actually leads like one of the last Comanche like, you know, fights again. He's like one of the last Indians to surrender. And the reason why he lasted the longest was because of the Palo Duro Canyon. So the Palo Duro Canyon in West Texas, you can't see it unless you're like right on it. And so for soldiers out in West Texas, it was like the Comanches just came out of nowhere. It was like, where are they? We can't find them. They just disappear and then they just pop up out of nowhere. And it's because like if you're looking out a long way, you can see really far in West Texas because it's all flat. But then the Palo Duro Canyon is like a hole dug in the ground, basically. And so, you know, it's a huge canyon. It's a beautiful canyon. And they actually had like a herd of horses and a herd of buffalo, like safely hidden there until finally, like the U.S. Army found it and they defeated Quanah Parker too. So, I mean, one by one, they're all put on reservations. The last major moment of bloodshed in the Indian Wars happens in 1890 at Wounded Knee. Okay? Wounded Knee Indian Reservation, 1890, okay, South Dakota. So, one by one, all the Native American tribes are put on reservations, okay? The U.S. government passes a law called the Dawes Act, and hopefully we'll talk about that in just a second. But the idea is that the U.S. government wants Native American reservations to Americanize, okay? They want Native Americans to give up their collective property owning. They want Native Americans to basically become farmers. Give each Native American 160 acres of land and let them be farmers just like everyone else. But a lot of these reservations are bigger than 160 acres of land times the number of Indians. Does that make sense? So the extra land becomes eligible for white settlement. So you have more white settlers moving on reservation lands under the Dawes Act, okay? And so Native Americans are feeling pretty bad by 1890. The buffalo have been slaughtered. Thousands of their warriors have been killed. They've lost their freedom. They've lost their way of life. And this happened in about 30 years. From 1860 to 1890, it goes from Native Americans pretty much having free reign over the Great Plains to being all on reservations. So this could happen in one person's lifetime, okay? Right, in a generation. You could have grown up and been 20 years old when it started, and by the time you're 50, you know, you had a childhood where you were free, living your, you know, best Indian life that you thought you could. And now in 1890, you're stuck on a reservation. And the reservation life is tough, okay? All right, the U.S. government is providing a lot of the basic necessities, but it's not exactly fun. It's not exactly luxury by any means, okay? Native Americans are suffering. And in this midst of hopelessness, someone provides them the chance of hope. His name is Wovoka. Wovoka is a Paiute Indian, and he believes that he has this vision. And in this vision, he sees this big, beautiful white buffalo, this like ghost of a buffalo. And the buffalo tells him some things, and I'm gonna probably butcher this, but basically the short end of the moral of the story or whatever is that there is a new religious movement that Native Americans need to follow called the ghost dance. If Wovoka believes, because of this vision that he says he has, that if Native Americans start doing this one particular dance, singing this one particular ghost song and ghost dance, and they start making themselves pure and giving up the Western ways and devoting themselves back to their old religion and devoting themselves back to their old beliefs and doing the ghost dance, that they will be able to defeat the white man, that the buffalo will come back, that the dead braves will rise up from the dead and join the living warriors. They start wearing these special shirts, these ghost dance shirts that are said to be able to repel the white man's bullets. And if they keep doing this dance, the buffalo are going to come back, all the dead braves are going to come back, and they're going to wipe the white man off of the Great Plains and send them back into the ocean to where they came from. That's Wovoka's prophecy that he has, that he says, okay? So Wovoka's prophecy is that the Indians will be able to come back. Like this is like an end times prophecy for the Indians' religion, okay? And Wovoka, his ghost dance, he starts telling people to do it. He starts saying, hey, listen, things are going to get better. We just got to do this dance. We just got to have faith. We got to be strong, whatever. And a lot of Native Americans who have nothing else to lose, they're already on the reservations. They're like, why not? Let's start doing the ghost dance. Okay, so start doing the ghost dance. And the movement spreads across different reservations. And these Indians start doing these dances. They start talking about how, the buffalo are going to come back and all this stuff. And the U.S. military, who's like monitoring the reservations, they're getting kind of freaked out. Okay, they're like, why are they dancing? What are they doing? What's going on? The U.S. Army does not like this. Okay, the ghost dance is continuing. And so the U.S. Army says, you know what? We better go ahead and take their guns away before anything bad happens. Okay. And so we have an example of what happens when people give the government their guns, okay? All right? Pinky promise, the government's going to take care of you. Just give up your guns and trust the government. Everything's going to be okay. Just ask the Indians at Wounded Knee Reservation what happens when they give up their guns, okay? So, at Wounded Knee, the Native Americans, they're ordered to give their guns to the U.S. military. So they're doing the process of giving the guns away. The government is collecting guns. And meanwhile, while this happens, there is a shot that goes off. Okay? It is very likely that it was an accident. Okay? Like it was just a misfire. There's all these guns being moved around, and one of them goes off. Okay? All right? There's some miscommunication. There's some problems going on. A shot is fired. The U.S. military, as soon as they hear a shot is fired, they open up, okay? And they were surrounding the village, like the camp, with Gatling guns, like early machine guns, okay? Now, some Indians do manage to shoot back once the shooting gets started, and people on both sides die, but this is a massacre. 300 Sioux men, women, and children die, along with 25 American soldiers, okay? This is an outright just massacre. Hundreds of men, women, children are killed in the last major moment of bloodshed in the Indian Wars. The ghost dance didn't work, as far as I can tell. The shirts didn't stop the bullets. The buffalo didn't come back like they said they would. It didn't happen. Okay, and so we have mass graves at Wounded Knee. Okay, Native Americans being slaughtered one last time. And there we have the end of one chapter of history, the conquest of North and South America. From 1492 until 1890, Europeans have been in almost constant contact with North and South America, okay, and in conflict as well. when Christopher Columbus came to the Americas, the first conflicts between Europeans and the North and South Americans really took off. Well, you can talk about like Vikings, but we're not going to. Anyways, so 400 years of conflict, 400 years of fighting. The Americas lost to Europe. Europe wins, okay? This is like the final nail in the coffin, the last major resistance. Now, to this day, there's some indigenous groups in like, the rainforests of Brazil or whatever that still live a life that's kind of like the life that they had before. But as far as like large areas of territory that belong to Native Americans, it's all gone. It's all gone. They've all lost, okay? The war is over. And the United States has opened up settlement to the west. Okay, more and more farmers, more and more ranchers, more and more mining, all happens throughout the western part of the United States now that the Native Americans have been dealt with. Okay, and it's sad and it's a tragedy, but it is what happened. So what happens to Native Americans after they're put on reservations? Okay, so these are the reservations that are in 1894, and a huge chunk of them are still around today. The ones in Arizona are much smaller now. The one in Oklahoma is much smaller now. But a lot of these reservations are still around for the most part, even today. Yeah, you can dare to compare on this map and that map, but they're pretty well the same. But that's how much territory they're left over with in 1894. Okay, so we talked about the Dawes Act. The Dawes Act of 1887, I believe, is what breaks up the reservations into small little chunks. Okay, Native Americans are forced through government policies to give up their old ways of life. They can't be nomadic, hunters anymore. There aren't any buffalo to chase around, and they're stuck on reservations. Native Americans, though, they don't want to just give up their old way of life. That's like asking someone to change everything about who they are and what they are all in one generation. And so the first generation of Native Americans really doesn't take to becoming farmers, okay? They don't want to. It's not how they live life. They don't even really have the same concept of owning land that people in the United States have, okay? So what the U.S. government decides to do is to work on a policy of assimilation, not with the old Native Americans, but with their children, okay? Assimilation is to make similar, okay? To make them the same as the rest of the country, okay? Assimilation happens to immigrants, okay? Or it's also known as Americanization, and it happens to Native Americans. It's when, for example, okay, if you are a child or a grandchild of an immigrant, okay? You are probably more American than they are, okay? Like the typical immigrant experience, someone moves in from a different country, they have to learn the language, they have to learn the culture, they have to learn the customs, but then their kids, they pick it up a lot faster, okay? Kids are much more open to new things, they learn faster, okay? So like a lot of times, you have like a parent who can't speak English, but their kids speak English, okay? And then their kids speak English. And then in a few generations, they may not even speak the old language of their home country, okay? And, by the time you get to like the grandkids or the great grandkids, they may not be able to like be socially or culturally that much different other than maybe their name, okay? This happens with immigrants today, and it happens with Native Americans back then. What the United States government starts doing is putting Native American children into schools, okay? They start building schools on reservations, and in some cases, they move Native American children off the reservation across the country into Indian schools where they teach them English, they teach them how to be like farmers, they teach them how to do like, blacksmithing, and they teach them about American history and American culture and American politics, and they change just about everything about them, okay? All right, you can see some pictures here of Native Americans before and after attending an Indian school, okay? All right, before, after. The clothes, the hair, everything. And the hair is a big deal, okay? Wearing long hair on a man was very important to a lot of Native Americans and part of their culture and part of like their pride. But for the United States, long hair on a man is not normal. We don't, like the culture doesn't really look kind of, and so we chop their hair, okay? We make them wear pants. We make them wear suits and ties. We make them sit in chairs instead of on the floor, okay? But this is assimilating them. And so a lot of Native American children, they go to these Native American schools and they learn English, they learn all these things, and then they go back to the reservation. And the idea for the US government is that they'll go back to the reservation and like teach everybody and they'll like change it from there. But usually what happens is they end up becoming like half of both worlds, where they go back home and their family resents them because they're different now. And they can't go out to the rest of the United States because people are going to be racist against them because they're Native Americans. They're kind of stuck in a, you win one, you lose one, you lose one, you win one sort of situation. Okay. Over time, eventually, Native Americans do get assimilated. In the 1920s, I believe is when Calvin Coolidge is president. I think it's 1924, Native Americans are given citizenship in the United States. Okay. And today, most Native Americans are assimilated. They wear blue jeans. They go to McDonald's. They work at regular jobs. The reservation system today has a lot of problems. Today, Indians are treated a whole lot better. And in fact, they're given a lot of benefits from the government, okay? And there's actually like money and like government support that goes to Native Americans. But most of the time, those benefits stop once you leave the reservation. So young Native Americans today have to make decisions. Do I want to stay on the reservation and get a small amount of like income guaranteed from the government? Or do I want to leave the reservation and try to have a better life and a better opportunity, go to college, make, start a business, make something more of my life, but then risk losing that family and that home there? Today, Native American reservations have really high rates of poverty, have high rates of alcoholism, mental illness, drug abuse, depression, suicide, bad problems. And some of it comes from the fact that like the system, they've been given a raw deal, everything's taken away from them, and now they're stuck on this reservation where they get just enough to get by. So that means they get a lot of time to just sit around, and you need something to do. Does that make sense? Like you need something to do with your life. You just sit around and you just think about all the ways that people have wronged you and done you bad. Bad things can happen. Okay, so there's problems. There is serious reform that needs to happen. Do I know how to fix it? No, I'm a history teacher. I have no idea how to fix it. I just know there's a problem. I'm being a problem spotter, not a problem solver. So, anyways, moving on. We are going to talk about but in most cases, over time, more and more assimilation happens. And today, Native Americans have been basically fully assimilated into the society of the United States. Okay. An example of probably the most successful early product of a Native American school is this guy right here, Jimthorpe, also known as the greatest athlete of all time ever. Do not question it, okay? If you want to question it, I'll prove you wrong, okay? Jimthorpe, yes, okay? Jimthorpe was a Native American. He went to Carlisle Indian School, okay? He was a Native American, I believe, from like the Southwest. Okay, I forget the exact name of his tribe. We can look it up. I think it was the Sac Fox Nation. I might be wrong. Anyways, he was Native American. He grew up in an Indian school, and he was an incredibly talented athlete. Okay, he became Americanized. Okay, he spoke English. He was still like Native American was his culture, but he had become completely Americanized. He's one of the people that was just kind of accepted into the rest of the world because of his athletic talent, okay? In high school, he quickly proved himself to be a great football player, basketball player, baseball player, and track star. He actually was an Olympic athlete. He won like the decathlon in the Olympic, I'm going to look at the exact Olympics, but it was in the 1920s, I believe. He won like the decathlon, which means like he was like able to win like triple jump, throwing like the javelin, high jump, sprinting, long, like he could do anything. But that wasn't just it. Like just that enough would be pretty impressive. But then he was an incredible football player, okay? He never wanted to be tackled, and he very rarely was, okay? Later on, there's this guy that he played football against who one day ended up becoming president. His name was Dwight Eisenhower. Dwight Eisenhower played football against the Carlisle Indian Bulldogs or whatever. Anyway, Dwight Eisenhower played football against Jimthorpe, and Jimthorpe ran like a 99-yard touchdown. The refs called it back. And then Jimthorpe was mad, so he ran another 900-yard touchdown. Okay, like he was just insane with the football. Back then, football was a little different. Okay, there was less pads. Okay, no shoulder pads, leather helmet, that sort of thing. The rules were a little bit different, and the ball was shaped different. Back then, the ball was a bit rounder on the ends, not so pointy. And this is still a thing you can do in football, which you may not care about. But in football, it is legal for the running back to drop the ball. He can bounce once, and then he can kick it. It's called a drop kick. And if it goes to the uprights, it's a field goal. Okay? Called a drop kick. You can do that. Don't do that, Nathan, because you'll get in trouble. Okay? The coach won't like you because today the ball is pointy, and so it'll bounce less predictably than what back then. But Jimthorpe, if someone was about to tackle him, he just kicked a field goal. Okay? He was super fast, super strong, run people over. But that's not all. He was also a professional basketball player. Okay? He was also a professional baseball player. Okay? He did everything. He was good at everything. He was like the best at everything. He was the first president of the NFL. Yes, the NFL, the National Federation of Football, or National Football League, whatever. He was the first president of it. And he was a Native American. Okay? All right. Now this class may not be super interested in that, but usually Jimthorpe gets like rave reviews. Let me tell you a small story about Jimthorpe, okay? When he was at the Olympics, someone stole his shoes. Okay, someone stole his shoes, and so this was a different time, but what he had to do was he dug through the trash. He dug through trash and found 2 misshapen shoes that weren't even his size and were mismatched. And he still won. He still ran the race in the decathlon and still won with crappy shoes. And you guys in high school track, you're like, oh, I'm missing 1 cleat. I gotta, whatever. Like, I know. I was a track coach. I know how like people are all persnickety, like, oh, I gotta do all these special stretches or what he didn't care. Okay, Jimthorpe, greatest athlete of all time. Okay, anyway. And he's Native American. He's probably like the biggest success story of assimilation, right? But not everyone was so well done. All right, anyways, we're going to probably move on, but most people that move to the West either get a job as a miner, a rancher, or a farmer. And we've kind of talked about all these things before, okay? There's a lot of cattle drives in Texas after the Civil War. So all these extra cattle, they have to drive them up north to the railroad until they build more railroads, okay? Tomorrow, we're probably going to start the Gilded Age because we need to get started on the Gilded Age, okay? Y'all have a great day. Do good things. Be good people. Make good choices. Yeah, tomorrow we'll be able to get the Gilded Age. That's awesome. Look up Jimthorpe, okay? Greatest athlete of all time.